Now, the World Food Programme is currently working with a massive budget shortfall, $3 billion. That's how much the UN agency was short last year as it tries to stop a growing number of people, many of them refugees, going hungry. The result, the WFP has been left with a crude choice, who to feed and who not to. In the past year, it's been forced to cut or entirely suspend food aid all over the world, from Ukraine to Colombia to Yemen and Syria. It's a complex picture, though, with world governments continuing to cough up money but reluctant to try and plug a seemingly unending funding gap. Just 6 weeks ago, the executive director of the World Food Programme, David Beasley, warned that 124 million people are on the brink of starvation. Mr. Beasley joins me now here in the studio. Good morning. Thanks very much for joining us here on France 24.
Good morning.
Let me start by asking you, you've been very clear then about the link between hunger and conflict, saying that if we really want to end hunger, we need to end wars. That's clearly a powerful message in and of itself, but I wonder, how realistic is that? Is it really fair to say, if we will people stop joining the Islamic State group if they have enough to eat?
Yeah, no, there's no question what we see on the field. And I've talked to mothers and fathers and children, and the mothers especially will tell you that my husband did not want to join ISIS or Al-Qaeda, but we had no food, and so they use food as a weapon of recruitment. We want to use food as a weapon of peace, of reconciliation. Of course, the extremists use it for a whole different purpose. And so in the last 2 years, and this is what's so sad and so shocking, the severe hunger number of people around the world has gone from 80 million to 124 million, and it's driven almost entirely, primarily by man-made conflict: Iraq, Syria, Yemen, South Sudan, and now, of course, we see extremists moving and collaborating into the Sahel, the greater Sahel region, trying to destabilize there. And so, while we're talking right now, every 5 seconds, a child is dying in the world from starvation, every 5 seconds. Yet with all the wealth we have in the world today, this is just wrong. It's just sad with so much wealth, and we've got to do more, and we can do better.
So let's talk then about some of those solutions. You mentioned recently you've been in the Sahel, and you've talked about how if Europe thought that the Syrian migration crisis was a big problem, wait till they see what hits them if people start to move out of the Sahel, a region of some 500 million. Now, let me ask you, are you trying to kind of scare governments here in Europe to providing you with a bit of money because you are so short of funds?
Absolutely. That's what I've said. If you think Syria was a problem, a nation of 18 to 20 million people with migration infiltrated by ISIS, wait till the greater Sahel of 500 million people. And the good news is that people do not want to migrate by and large. Our studies, our surveys, when we talk to people, they don't want to leave. But if they don't have food and there's no security, they have no choice but to do what they can to protect their children. And so we know, for example, in Syria, when we feed a Syrian in a war zone, it costs us about 50 cents per day. Normally it's about 25 to 30 cents in a non-war zone, non-conflict area. But to feed that same Syrian in Paris or in Berlin with total humanitarian costs is about 50 euros per day. So it's 100 times cheaper to do it in country. And so if we get ahead of the curve and provide stabilization and sustainable development and resilience, and this is what we want to do, put together programs where people, it's not just giving them food, it's giving them hope and creating livelihoods and change lives. And this is what our programs are all about.
Now, this is your first trip to Paris, then, since you took the reins at the WFP. I note that France is relatively low down the list of donor countries compared, say, to comparable countries like Germany or the United Kingdom. Do you think France needs to give you more money? What message would you like to give to the President, Emmanuel Macron?
It's why we're here, particularly with the Francophone countries and the Sahel and the French-speaking countries, whereby I think France can play a very critical and vital role that will protect not just France, but Europe from unwanted migration. And I think if we do it right, because France has such a history and experience. And yes, France has been low on the totem pole, but I think from the conversations that I have had just in these past 2 days, there's a genuine desire from the French government so that the French people can make a greater impact upon this problem in the Sahel and the greater Sahel region. So we're very hopeful that the funding will increase, but I'm less concerned about the funding, though, than I am about the cooperative spirit. And it may be if when coming to the school meals programs, for example, we're the largest provider of school meals programs, which is huge impact on children not getting married at age 12 or 13 and having 8 or 9 children. And we know that with young women, if they're in school, you know, they don't get married at 12 years old, like we're seeing in Niger or Mali. They wait till they're 14 or 15 or 16, and the number of children they have goes down, economic incomes go up. And so if we go into these school meals programs, we're hoping that the French government can come in and help with teachers. And so it can be a collaborative spirit.
Let me ask you, then, you supported Donald Trump's campaign for the White House. He appointed you to this role. He's never really hidden his hostility to the UN system, has he? He's talked about widespread funding cuts to the UN. Yeah. They've not come through for your organisation, but they have for some of your other organisations, the UN population funds, for example. Are you concerned about his hostility to foreign aid? Well,
one of the reasons I took this role and was talked into this role was to convince Washington that international aid is critical to stability and peace and in the national security interest of nations around the world, including the United States. And so, as I've said to the White House, as I've said to the United States Senate, if you want to spend another $500 billion on military, it's easy. Cut the World Food Program, because we are the first line of offense and defense against extremism and destabilization. And so here's what's been tremendous. When I took this position, the United States was funding the World Food Program at $1.9 billion out of less than $6 billion. Today, last year, we increased the funding, working with the President Trump and the White House and the Democrats and the Republicans. It's been really quite remarkable because they fight on everything, it seems like. So the increase went from $1.9 billion to $2.5 billion, and we anticipate this year that the United States may step up to $3 billion. So that's good news, but it's still all hands on deck, though.
Yeah, that's $3 billion, I know, is what you're hoping for. But I note that from your last data, which came out in April, they haven't even touched a third of that yet. So do you really think it's realistic that Donald Trump is going to fulfill his pledge to your organisation?
Yeah, I do. I feel very confident because the sentiment with the Congress, the United States Senate, U.S. House, is very strong. And the President's been very supportive of the World Food Program. And I've said when he gets the facts before him, he'll make the right decision. So I'm very confident. But as I heard from the White House and I heard from my leaders in the Senate and the House, they said, we're stepping up. We're doing more. And now Europe, you got to do more too. And so, and Europe is Germany, the EU, the UK, and now we're hoping that France will do more. So, because there's a lot of needs out there, because of the conflicts. We have 19 areas in sustained conflict at this stage, and it's devastating. 50% of all humanitarian spending right now is just in 4 countries. And if we can end the conflicts in South Sudan and Syria and Yemen and Iraq, that will free up billions of dollars to places like the Sahel, which are very fragile, been impacted by climate change. Because when you take fragile governments with climate change and extremism, oh, it's a disaster for catastrophe. And so we need to be in there with sustainable development.
Before you leave us, let me just ask you one brief question. You recently gained unprecedented access to parts of North Korea, that coming just a few days ahead of what we hope is really a historic summit between the North Korean leader and Donald Trump. What are you hoping to achieve there? Are you trying to lobby the United States to pour more money into North Korea if the deal goes well?
Well, if the deal goes through, we're hopeful that the United States and other countries around the world will come to the aid of the citizens and the children, the people of DPRK. Because what I saw on the ground was not interesting enough, was not starvation, but there are a lot of malnutrition issues, chronic malnutrition, stunting from children, but there's a lot of work to be done, and I do believe that we can address the hunger issue in North Korea in a very short time period once we can get past this particular issue of denuclearization.
David Beasley, thank you very much indeed. David Beasley there, the Executive Director of the World Food Programme, talking to us here on France 24 this morning.